Gifford Pinchot can be credited as the man who pioneered conservation in America. Although he faced tremendous opposition from the government, big business, and the public, Gifford never stopped believing in a sustainable America. So I want to go over a little background on Gifford since he's not well known or iconic to the average person outside of forestry circles. He was born into a rich family of lumber tycoons. His parents saw what the lumber industry was doing to the forests in the East and saw their son as compensation for what their family's previous generations had done. When Pinchot came of age to go to college, his father asked him how he felt about forestry, and gave him the book The Earth as Modified by Human Action. This book, in essence, showed Gifford what his true calling would be. At that time, there was no forestry practice in the United States, so he went to Europe to learn about forest management. While there, he saw that all the lands was owned by the wealthy noblemen and women. When he came back to the United States, he brought with him the idea that America's land should be owned and managed by all of its citizens. Later on, he met up with Teddy Roosevelt, who had the same passion and shared similar ideas in regards to preserving the land. Shortly after Teddy became president, Gifford was appointed the first U.S. forester, and he later on went to create the Forest Service. I can think of no better example of modeling the way than Gifford Pinchot's conservation efforts. I say this because he invented the concept. There were no forestry jobs, titles, or schools when he started, so he went and made them. As to why he chose forestry, Gifford wrote, and I quote, "The fact that forestry was new and strange and promised action probably had as much to do with it as my love for the woods." With his efforts, Gifford created not just an agency, but a profession, and not many people can say they've done that. Gifford was able to inspire others because he himself was so passionate about the subject. Just as a side note, one of the sources I use is this book. It's called The Big Burn by Timothy Egan. And it's one of my favorite books. I've read it several times. It's about the founding of public lands and Forest Service and how the Great Fire of 1910 in Idaho and Montana saved the struggling concept of conservation in America at the turn of the century. The book mentions a friend of TR as saying this about Pinchot, and I quote, "His eyes do not look as if they read books, but gaze upon a cause." Pinchot was so inspiring to his followers, in fact, that his fledgling foresters were called little GPs, and he the chief. The little GPs called themselves forest missionaries and believed wholeheartedly in the Great Crusade, as Pinchot called it. These rangers were few, about one ranger per million acres, had a miserable pay, which was about $900 a year. It's about half of what a teacher would make nowadays, and risked considerable danger from the job itself and the public who hated them. However, most of them loved their job and saw their cause as a righteous one under GP's tutelage. Gifford Pinchot challenged the process on many fronts. I was able to find a documentary made by the U.S. Forest Service called The Greatest Good. This video talks about all of the different challenges the Forest Service faced in its early years. Titans of industry hated Pinchot when he set aside land as public domain. They were no longer receiving government grants that gave them free land for logging, mining, and building railroads in the West. Congress was continually trying to undercut Teddy and Gifford's efforts. The country's laissez-faire view of commerce didn't bode well for an organization that restricted grazing and logging on national lands. One example of Gifford's style of handling these challenges was how he dealt with illegal sheep grazers in Yellowstone. Since it was wild country and the rangers had limited means of enforcing the law, they were told to herd the sheep out of the park on the side opposite the farmers. By the time the farmers got to their flocks, the grazing season was over. This reoccurred until the ranchers gave up. Gifford was the catalyst for change in a lot of areas. He was able to create the first forestry school in the country at Yale, his alma mater, where his little GPs got their education and were trained how to do things like map, survey, pack horses, and camp cook. Gifford wanted his foresters to be able to write as well. His men wrote articles and were interviewed all over the country. In short, they were forestry propaganda as well as rangers. By enabling his men, Gifford was able to enforce and advertise the conservation movement. Gifford at his roots loved the land. It was obvious to everyone he knew, and from what I've read, infectious to those around him. Gifford believed that his work was in the best interest of the country and that their efforts were for the benefit of future generations. In his book, The Fight for Conservation, that I have here, he supports Roosevelt's conservation policies, and I quote, "I stand for the Roosevelt policies because they set the common good of all of us above the private gain of some of us. Because they recognize the livelihood of the small man as more important to the nation than the profit of the big man. Because they oppose all useless waste at present with the cost of robbing the future. Because they demand the complete, sane, and orderly development of all our natural resources. Because they insist upon equality of opportunity and denounce monopoly and special privilege. Because discarding false issues, they deal directly with the vital questions that really make a difference with the welfare of us all. And most of all, because in them the plain American always and everywhere holds the first place, and I propose to stand for them while I have the strength to stand for anything." Gifford's mantra was the greatest good for the greatest number in the long run. His leadership style, as well as the work he did, inspires me personally, and I'm sure others, to appreciate the land that is our birthright and responsibility as American citizens. Thank you for watching. Just so you know, these are my references.